The hushed urgency in Grandview's elite operating room shattered into raw despair. Sergeant Major Kaelan O'Connor, a hero revered for countless battles, lay teetering on the precipice of death, his lifeblood ebbing with every frantic monitor beep. Dr. Adebayo, chief of surgery, slammed his gloved hand down, his authoritative voice cracking, "It's impossible. Any intervention is a death sentence." Dr. Kowalski, usually sharp and confident, simply shook her head, defeat etched on her face. Kaelan's daughter sobbed, clutching her father's hand, pleading for a miracle no one could provide. In the controlled chaos, a quiet figure observed from the periphery, Nurse Xiomara Salgado. The rookie in Grandview's gleaming halls, her presence was barely acknowledged by the renowned specialists. Yet, as she watched, a subtle shift occurred behind her unassuming eyes. Where others saw only insurmountable risk, Xiao perceived a faint, almost intuitive pathway. The collective sorrow of the room became her burden, but beneath it, a desperate, unspoken promise bloomed: she would find a way. The sterile hum of the operating room, usually a symphony of controlled precision, now throbbed with a different kind of tension, the grim silence of defeat. Dr. Adebayo, his formidable presence usually commanding, stood with shoulders slumped, a rare crack in his professional armor. Dr. Kowalski, typically a whirlwind of focused energy, had frozen, her gaze fixed on the grim vitals display. Every muted beep from the machines was a hammer blow to the family waiting outside, and to the small, quiet figure observing them all. Xiomara Salgado felt the weight of their despair like a physical shroud. She'd studied Kaelan's scans again, the jagged anomaly of phantom pain in her own hands. In her mind's eye, she didn't see an impossible surgical challenge, she saw a battlefield problem, a unique solution forged in grit and necessity, not textbooks. The courage to speak up felt like a stone lodged in her throat, yet Kaelan's fading breath was a silent imperative. She stepped forward, her voice, when it came, barely a whisper against the hum. "Doctors. Forgive me, but I think there might be another way." Adebayo, startled from his reverie, turned, his brows furrowed in annoyance. Kowalski, however, merely offered a tight, dismissive smile. "Another way, Nurse Salgado," her tone dripping with thinly veiled condescension. "Are you suggesting we overlooked something, fresh from nursing school?" Xiao swallowed, the sting of the jibe familiar, but pressed on. "Not overlooked, doctor. Just different. In the field, sometimes, with fragments lodged like this, near critical vessels, we learned a technique. A very precise external manipulation. To shift the fragment, just enough, to relieve pressure, to give you a window for a safer, slower extraction." She gestured vaguely with her hands, trying to convey the tactile feel she knew. Adebayo's face hardened, his initial annoyance morphing into outright disdain. He scoffed, a loud, contemptuous sound that echoed in the quiet room. "External manipulation. Are you insane, nurse? This is Grandview, not some field tent held together with duct tape and prayers. You'll kill him, nurse. You'll trigger a full hemorrhage, and he'll be dead on this table within minutes." Kowalski chimed in, her voice sharper, more cutting. "It's reckless folly, Salgado. A desperate, unproven idea from someone with no concept of surgical protocol, or indeed, basic anatomy beyond what's on a diagram. Stick to your charts." Xiao recoiled as if physically struck. Her heart sank, a heavy, familiar ache of being underestimated, dismissed, silenced. The familiar humiliation washed over her, a bitter taste in her mouth. She was just a nurse, a rookie, and these were the titans of medicine. Their words were designed to crush, to put her back in her place. Yet, as she met their dismissive gazes, she thought of Kaelan, the brave veteran whose life was slipping away. She thought of his family's desperate plea for a miracle. And beneath the sting of their derision, a flicker of defiance ignited. She might be underestimated, but she wasn't wrong. The veteran's fading life wasn't just fueling her desperation anymore, it was forging a steel resolve. The air in the ICU observation room grew heavy, suffocating. Kaelan's vitals, stubbornly stable despite the internal bleeding, began a slow, insidious decline. A low, persistent beep from the monitor drew Adebayo's narrowed gaze. "He's crashing," Zio murmured, her voice tight with urgency. "The pressure is shifting. The fragment, it's destabilizing even more." She pointed to a subtle change on the cardiac monitor, a slight irregularity in the waveform that only an acutely attuned observer might notice. "We need to act now, Chief. Or at least acknowledge what's happening." Adebayo, his jaw clenched, ignored her. He was already consulting with Kowalski, their heads bent over the scans, discussing conventional measures, a different vasoconstrictor, perhaps a last-ditch attempt at embolization, even though they'd already deemed it too risky. "Nurse Salgado, we are exploring every viable option," he said, without looking up. "Kindly monitor." As they debated, Kaelan's condition worsened. The persistent beep escalated into a frantic, piercing alarm. His blood pressure plummeted, oxygen saturation spiraled down. The monitors screamed. Adebayo and Kowalski reacted, adrenaline spiking, calling for more fluids, adjusting drips with textbook precision. But Zio knew it wasn't enough. Their actions were a band-aid on a gushing artery, designed to manage symptoms, not address the root cause she understood instinctively. The internal shifts she'd predicted were happening, exacerbated by the very interventions meant to help. Kaelan's daughter, standing just outside the glass, saw the terror in the doctor's eyes, heard the escalating alarms. She pressed her hands against the cool pain, her face contorted in a silent scream. Her father, a man who had faced down horrors, was now fading before her, abandoned by the very people sworn to save him. Zio couldn't watch anymore. She moved decisively, crossing the room to the family. "He's not responding," she said, her voice low but clear, cutting through the rising panic. "The shrapnel is shifting. Every conventional approach risks dislodging it completely. They're trying to stabilize him, but it's making it worse. It's tightening the noose." The daughter's eyes, wide with raw grief, locked onto Zio's. What do you mean?" "My experience in the field taught me how to feel these things," Zio explained, her voice gaining strength, conviction. "How to use precise external pressure to gently manipulate an internal object, to stabilize it, to create a safer pathway for extraction. It's unconventional, yes. It's not in any textbook. But it offers a chance. The only chance now." Tears streamed down the daughter's face, but behind them, a spark of desperate hope ignited. She looked from the grim faces of the esteemed doctors, who now stood defeated as the alarms blared, to Zio's unwavering, earnest gaze. The certainty in Zio's eyes, the quiet strength that belied her rookie status, was a beacon. "They've given up," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You haven't." She turned, her voice rising, infused with a sudden, fierce resolve that silenced even the blaring monitors for a moment. "No. You will not let him die. Dr. Adebayo, Dr. Kowalski, you said there was nothing more you could do. Well, Nurse Salgado has a different answer. My father deserves every single chance. You will let her try." The fear in her voice was still palpable, but it was now laced with an unshakable demand. She looked at Zio, her eyes pleading, demanding not just hope, but action. Isn't it amazing how often the most brilliant solutions come from the least expected places? Like Zio, many of us know what it's like to be underestimated, to fight for a chance to prove ourselves. If you're rooting for Zio, if you love stories where the overlooked find their voice and make an extraordinary impact, then we invite you to join our journey. Hit that subscribe button and become part of our incredible global community. Your support isn't just a click, it helps us bring more gripping, heartfelt narratives like Zio's to life. Let's build this inspiring community together. The operating room air was thick, not just with the sterile scent of antiseptics, but with an almost palpable tension. Every pair of eyes, from the weary anesthesiologist to the stone-faced Dr. Adebayo and the sharply observant Dr. Kowalski, was fixed on Xiomara. It wasn't scrutiny, it was an inquisition. Each glint of surgical steel seemed to reflect their collective doubt, their readiness for her failure. Xiao felt the weight of it all, the weight of Kaelan's fading life, the desperate trust of his family, and the damning predictions of the medical elite. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled as she donned the sterile gloves. This wasn't a dusty tent under a desert sun, with only a flashlight and a prayer. This was Grandview, the pinnacle of medical science, and she, a rookie nurse, was about to attempt something no textbook prescribed. A wave of profound fear washed over her, cold and sharp. What if I'm wrong? What if I kill him? The whisper of self-doubt was a venomous snake, coiling in her gut. She could feel Adebayo's narrowed gaze, Kowalski's smirk barely hidden behind her mask. They expected her to falter. They wanted her to. But then, Kaelan's face flashed in her mind, the lines of a life honorably lived, now contorted in pain. She remembered his daughter's fierce demand, "You will let her try." That wasn't just a demand for permission, it was a plea for life, a transfer of hope. And in that moment, the venomous coil in her gut began to unravel, replaced by a searing, uncompromising resolve. She was no longer Xiomara Salgado, rookie nurse, but Xiomara Salgado, the last chance. Her past, her hard-won skills from impossible situations, coalesced into a quiet strength. They don't know what I know. They don't feel what I feel. Taking a deep, centering breath, Xiao stepped forward. She didn't reach for a scalpel or a complex device. Instead, she placed her bare gloved hands gently, deliberately, on Kaelan's chest, her fingers splaying out over the area indicated by the scans. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, tuning out the beeping monitors, the muffled conversations, the heavy silence of judgment. She was searching, not just with her hands, but with an almost spiritual intuition, a tactile empathy that transcended sight and diagnostics. She was searching for the feel of the anomaly, the subtle internal shifts that only her unique experience had taught her to discern. "Nurse Salgado, what are you doing?" Adebayo's voice cut through the air, sharp with impatience. "We are losing time. Are you beginning your procedure?" He couldn't hide the derision. Xiao ignored him, her brow furrowed in concentration. She felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a subtle difference in density and resistance beneath her fingertips. The fragment. It was exactly as her intuition had screamed. A minute adjustment, an infinitesimal shift of pressure, and she began. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost meditative. Her gaze, when it flickered open, was locked onto Kaelan's face, not the monitors. She was talking to his body, coaxing it, guiding it. Suddenly, a harsh, insistent wail pierced the controlled tension of the room. The monitor above Kaelan's head flashed an angry red. His heart rate plummeted, blood pressure crashed. Vitals crashing, the anesthesiologist barked, his voice laced with panic. "She's killing him." Dr. Kowalski shrieked, her earlier composure shattering into horrified accusation. Adebayo lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of furious confirmation. "Stop. You've gone too far, nurse." The chaos erupted around Xiao, a cacophony of alarms and shouts, but a strange, profound calm settled over her. This wasn't new. This was the familiar precipice she'd stood on countless times in the field, when the world dissolved into noise and only the patient's desperate flicker of life remained. She didn't hesitate. Her hands, which had been gently manipulating, now moved with a lightning-quick, precise pressure, a minute, almost invisible adjustment of her palm. It wasn't a guess, it was instinct born of desperate necessity, a memory of a distant patient, a makeshift tent, and a similar, sudden drop. The chaotic symphony of distress notes faded, replaced by the steady, rhythmic beeping of Kaelan's restored heartbeat. The shrill cries of the monitors, which had been screaming a moment ago, began to soften, then quiet. The angry red above Kaelan's head winked out, replaced by a reassuring green. Dr. Adebayo's outstretched hand, still mid-lunge to stop Xio, froze in mid-air. His face, moments ago contorted in a mask of furious confirmation, now hung slightly agape, eyes wide with a confusion that bordered on stupefaction. He hadn't seen what she did, only that she had done something minute, almost invisible, and the patient, who had been on the precipice of death, had just pulled back. His vitals are stabilizing, the anesthesiologist stammered, his voice thin with disbelief, his eyes fixed on the monitors, then on Xio's unmoving form. Heart rate recovering, pressure coming back up. Dr. Kowalski's furious accusation, "She's killing him," died on her lips, replaced by a pale, disbelieving stare. Her ambition, her rigid adherence to protocol, her entire worldview was being upended by a rookie nurse who had just performed a silent miracle. A ripple of silent shock spread through the operating room staff, a collective gasp that was never quite exhaled. Xio, oblivious to the sudden, profound shift in the room's emotional climate, was a study in absolute concentration. The world outside Kaelan's body, the glaring lights, the stunned faces, the sudden silence, had ceased to exist. Her hands, still resting on Kaelan's abdomen, moved with an almost imperceptible pressure, a slow, rhythmic kneading that seemed more like a prayer than a procedure. Her eyes were closed for a moment, then opened, their gaze distant, inward, as if she were seeing not with her retinas, but with the tips of her fingers, mapping the internal landscape of flesh and bone and danger. Adebayo lowered his arms slowly, his gaze locked on Xio. His skepticism, once an impenetrable wall, had developed a hairline fracture. He watched, fascinated despite himself, as Xio's fingers danced with an exquisite precision, a ballet of touch and intuition. She wasn't pushing, she wasn't forcing. She was coaxing, guiding, feeling for the infinitesimal movements of the shrapnel fragment, teasing it away from the major vessel with a dexterity he couldn't comprehend. It was like watching a sculptor at work, except the medium was human life, and the tool was pure, raw instinct honed by untold trauma. The tension in the room hadn't vanished, it had simply transformed, from panic to a breathless, almost sacred awe. Every eye was on Xio, on her impossibly steady hands, on the quiet miracle unfolding before them. The quiet miracle continued, Xio's focus an impenetrable shield against the world. Her fingers, guided by an instinct honed in the most brutal of conditions, coaxed the last millimeter of resistance from the fragment. There was a final, almost imperceptible shift beneath her touch, a whisper of movement that only she could truly feel. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace, she retracted her hands. Her eyes, still holding that distant, interior gaze, blinked once, twice, and then snapped into sharp focus, meeting Adebayo's. A silent, urgent message passed between them, "It's done. The path is clear." Adebayo, his face a mask of disbelief struggling against dawning comprehension, didn't hesitate. With Xio's impossible work complete, the fragment was now positioned, no longer a death sentence awaiting a surgeon's knife, but a viable target. His hands, though still harboring a residual tremor from the preceding tension, moved with the practiced efficiency of a master craftsman. He took the instrument offered by a stunned scrub nurse, and with a swift, precise movement, he completed the extraction. The tiny, wicked shard, no bigger than a fingernail, clattered into the waiting tray, a relic of war, now harmlessly removed. The monitors, which moments ago had threatened to flatline, now sang a steady, reassuring rhythm. Kaelan's vital signs, once a frantic, descending graph, leveled out, then began a slow, steady climb back toward stability. The pallor began to recede from his face, replaced by a healthier flush. He was stable. He was alive. A collective, shuddering gasp rippled through the room, quickly followed by a profound, almost silent exhale. It wasn't just breath, it was the release of every ounce of tension, fear, and doubt that had accumulated over the past agonizing hour. The air, heavy with unspoken dread, now vibrated with an entirely different energy, triumph. Adebayo stood frozen for a moment, the surgical instrument still in his hand, his gaze fixed on the fragment. Then, he looked at Xio. His stern, authoritative features softened, etched with a raw emotion that bordered on awe. He offered a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture more powerful than any shouted praise, a silent acknowledgement of a skill he could not have imagined. It was humility, respect, and a dawning understanding all rolled into one. Kowalski, who had been poised like a predator awaiting its prey, now sagged against a console, her initial shock dissolving into something akin to grudging admiration. She had seen the impossible. Her ambitious gaze, usually so sharp with calculation, now held a flicker of genuine wonder as she looked at Xio. No words passed her lips, but the tightness around her eyes eased, and a faint, almost imperceptible nod of her own confirmed it. Xio had earned her respect. For Xio, the world swam slightly. The adrenaline, which had coursed through her veins like wildfire, now began its slow retreat, leaving behind a sudden, crushing exhaustion. A wave of profound, bone-deep relief washed over her, making her knees tremble. The weight of the world, for a moment, lifted from her shoulders, replaced by a warmth that spread through her chest. This wasn't just a patient saved, it was a validation, a catharsis years in the making. She looked at Kaelan, his chest rising and falling evenly, and a single, unbidden tear traced a path down her cheek. He was safe. She had done it. The operating room, once a crucible of frantic energy, now hummed with a different kind of intensity, the quiet awe of reprieve. Kaelan's vitals steadily climbed back to a stable rhythm, each beat a testament to the miracle that had just unfolded. The surgical team, moments ago rigid with tension, began to loosen, their movements lighter, their whispered exclamations carrying a shared sense of disbelief and triumph. Then, the doors swung open and Kaelan's family rushed in, a torrent of raw emotion. His daughter, eyes red-rimmed but now shining with a desperate hope, knelt beside Xio. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched Xio's hands, her grip surprisingly strong. You saved him," she choked out, her voice thick with gratitude. "You gave him back to us." Her mother and siblings crowded around, their collective relief a palpable wave, enveloping Xio. They didn't just thank her, they embraced her, their profound relief and trust washing over her like a warm tide. This wasn't just professional recognition, it was personal, visceral validation, etching itself onto her soul. Adebayo, having quietly confirmed Kaelan's stable condition, approached Xio. The usual stern set of his jaw was softened by an unfamiliar solemnity. His gaze, once so dismissive, now held a deep, reflective quality. "Nurse Salgado," he began, his voice surprisingly gentle, "what you did, it was beyond anything I've encountered in a textbook. Or in 20 years of surgery." He paused, a flicker of professional humility crossing his face. "You saw something we didn't. You felt something." He extended his hand, a silent, weighty gesture of respect that transcended their hierarchy. "Thank you." Kowalski, standing nearby, seemed to struggle with an internal conflict. Her ambition still simmered, but it was now tempered by undeniable reality. She looked at Xio, then back at Kaelan, then at Xio again. I wouldn't have believed it possible," she admitted, her voice low. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a professional capitulation to irrefutable skill. For Kowalski, that was as close to praise as Xio was likely to get. As the immediate intensity began to recede, Xio felt a profound emotional release. Her hands, still trembling slightly, had done the impossible. The hidden knowledge that Adebayo had scoffed at, the reckless folly Kowalski had condemned, it was simply who she was. Her years in field hospitals weren't just about learning techniques, they were about learning resilience, about understanding the human body not as an abstract diagram, but as a fragile, complex system reacting to trauma in countless, unpredictable ways. She had learned to listen, not just with her ears, but with her hands, her intuition, her very being. This acute observation, this quiet ability to connect with a patient's suffering and find a way through the impossible, wasn't a qualification on paper. It was a philosophy of care forged in the crucible of extreme need, making her deeply humble, yet fiercely effective. She didn't seek accolades, she sought to save lives. And in saving Kaelan, she had not only proven her worth to others but solidified it within herself. Her quiet strength, once a barrier, was now her undeniable power. Kaelan O'Connor, the revered war veteran whose life had hung by a thread, made a steady and remarkable recovery. His family, particularly his daughter, became Zio's most vocal champions, their gratitude a tangible, heartfelt warmth that radiated through the sterile halls of Grandview. They spoke of Zio not as a nurse, but as their miracle worker, their quiet hero. Their unwavering trust in her had not only saved Kaelan but had irrevocably altered the trajectory of Zio's professional life. Dr. Adebayo, a man whose professional pride was as formidable as his surgical skill, found himself profoundly changed. The immediate aftermath saw him retreat into a contemplative silence, replaying the near-fatal moments in the OR, the dismissal in his own voice, and Zio's unwavering calm. The silent nod of respect he'd offered Zio was merely the first tremor. Days later, he sought her out, not in the bustling corridors, but in a quiet consultation room. He spoke, not with the typical authoritative tone, but with a humility that surprised them both. He acknowledged her extraordinary skill, her unique insight, admitting that his adherence to established protocol had nearly cost a man his life. He didn't just offer an apology. He extended an olive branch, suggesting a collaboration, an open dialogue to integrate her unconventional expertise into Grandview's protocols, particularly for complex trauma cases. It was an unprecedented gesture, a seismic shift in his professional worldview, fueled by the stark reality of Kaelan's survival. He was learning to listen, truly listen, for the first time in years. Dr. Kowalski's transformation was more subtle, a quiet reevaluation beneath her polished exterior. While her ambition remained, her ruthlessness had been tempered by the undeniable proof of Zio's intuitive genius. She still adhered to protocol, but now, a flicker of curiosity, a nascent respect, shaded her ambition. She observed Zio with a new intensity, no longer seeing a mere rookie to be outmaneuvered, but a force to be understood, perhaps even emulated in the future. She began to ask Zio questions, initially about Kaelan's case, then about general patient insights, a quiet acknowledgement that there was indeed wisdom beyond the textbook. Grandview Medical Center, once an unyielding monolith of hierarchy, began to experience a gentle, yet profound, shift. Zio was no longer the quiet nurse, she was the nurse who saved Sergeant Major O'Connor. Her reputation blossomed, not from self-promotion, but from genuine admiration and respect. She found her voice, not in shouting, but in confident, articulate advocacy for patient-centered care, for listening to the nuances of individual recovery, for bridging the gap between textbook medicine and lived human experience. Her past, once a private wellspring of expertise, became a valuable resource she shared, teaching junior staff about the art of observation, the power of intuition, and the vital role of empathy. Zio had not just saved a life, she had transformed one, many, perhaps even an entire institution. She returned to her authentic self, not needing to hide her extraordinary abilities, but embracing them as an integral part of her identity. Her quiet strength, once perceived as a weakness, was now her undeniable power, inspiring a new generation of healthcare professionals to trust their instincts, to challenge the status quo, and to always prioritize the human being at the heart of their care. Grandview's gleaming halls, once silent arbiters of rigid authority, now resonated with the subtle hum of possibility, of hope, and of a future where every voice, every unique skill, was valued in the relentless pursuit of healing. Zio's incredible journey reminds us that true wisdom often whispers from unexpected places, and that trusting our unique strengths can spark profound change. Has her story inspired you to look differently at the unsung heroes around you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you felt the power of this narrative, please join our global community by subscribing. Your support helps us create more compelling and uplifting stories like Zio's. Thank you so much for watching, for being with us on this journey, and for valuing every voice. Together, we can share more tales of courage and transformation.